packed house over there.
Well, that's very different from nonprofits. We don't get huge applause.
It's because you guys are like recording 2 shows back to back and other stuff.
I know.
It's the Sunday thing. Hey, everybody, welcome to the Atheist Experience. We're live.
Yay.
It is July 21st, 2019. Hope you're all doing well. I'm Matt Dillahunty, and joining me this week, my good friend, Denis Loubet.
It's been a long time.
It has been. We've done this, I don't know, a couple of times before.
Yeah.
Dennis's schedule doesn't actually often allow him to do this, so I'm very grateful that we found time to get you in.
Yeah, drove in from Bastrop. Yeah.
What have you been up to?
I've been setting up an online store and looking after people's dogs and things like that.
Aw.
Friends' dogs, yeah.
Well, if it wasn't so
Dog
far,
sitting.
you could drive those dogs down to my house. We could let them run around the backyard.
Cool.
We even had dogs on my trampoline. They were not pleased by that.
No. Especially old dogs would not enjoy that.
I had done it with the cats before, too. And what ends up happening is there's a big 9 foot by 11 foot trampoline. And whatever animal goes in there just ends up sitting in the corner going, this is weird.
The corner, I would
This is
expect
weird.
them to be right in the center.
Oh, gosh, no. That's too bouncy. The center's the bounciest. All right, how are you guys doing? I know you can't answer me, but we have full lines, and there's good calls coming up. Later on, we'll toss out a website where people can find you some more, but you're still...
Okay.
You've been doing the nonprofits since before I was involved in the organization.
Yeah.
You've done Atheist Experience on occasion when we had space and you had time.
Yeah.
What else do you do, Dennis? I mean, apart from
I
just
do
watching dogs.
art. I mean, my big career was doing art for video games and computer games and stuff, and I still do that.
It's a good thing the lines are full. Otherwise, all my gamer geek friends would be calling in to ask me questions about that.
That's right.
And that's not necessarily what this show's about. A couple of quick announcements. The Nonprofits with Jamie Boone, Kevin Stein, and V. LaBianca will be showing at 6:30 right after the Atheist Experience is over. There'll be a link in the description down there-ish. Also, the Bat Cruise, the AC's annual awesome event of hotness, is September 21st. You can get tickets at bit.ly/batcruise or at bit.ly/batcruise. You'll figure it out. They'll have a thing. It's right there because Mark is way faster than me. That's how you get the information. The Bat Cruise, we are still going through the planning stuff. And what with, a transition after the elections and other things like that. What we're hoping is I think we booked 2 boats again this year. That's right. Maybe. But we've been planning, and the back cruise keeps getting a little bigger every year.
Sure, that's how things go.
And my goal for next year, this year is going to be a normal back cruise, which means if you're coming to Austin for the back cruise, there's lots of stuff you can do, including going to Esther's Follies, which I always do immediately after the back cruise. Hell, I was at Esther's 10 o'clock show last night. If you're not familiar with it, Esther's Follies is a live musical variety comedy magic show that is just my absolute favorite thing to do in Austin. It's where I take friends from out of town. It's every time I'm on a first date, we go to Esther's. Not because I'm not creative enough to come up with other first dates, but if they don't like Esther's, I don't want to or need a second date. It's just too much of who I am in one capsule. Don't miss it if you're in Austin, but also don't miss the Atheist Community of Austin. Right now we're at 1507 West Canning Lane. Any atheist or atheist-friendly person is welcome to come down. The building's open 7 days a week from 11 to 9. There's always stuff going on. There's philosophy group stuff on Wednesday. We have 9 different programs that we're recording at different times. The schedules are moving around. There's the Atheist Experience and Talk Heathen and Nonprofits and Secular Sexuality and just countless others. There's a big list. I realize as president, I'm supposed to know all this stuff.
Yeah.
Give me a minute. After I became president, I then went to the International Brotherhood of Magicians Convention for a week.
There you go.
I worked from 8 a.m. to 1 a.m. pretty much every day we were there. I was with the tech team, and so I was running the cameras, and we had to learn, I'm going to guess, 40 some odd different acts. Because there was a stage show competition in addition to the other stuff. So to all my friends in the magic community, thank you for a great week. I had a great time working back there, getting to talk with people. And now I'm back in the saddle or perhaps the stirrups and the bit, as some people might say. But we've got a number of things going on anytime during the week. If you're in Austin, stop by. And there are people coming in all the time.
Yeah. I could tell that things are getting bigger because it's like the parking problem here at the Free Thought Library is getting bigger.
Parking is at a premium. Fortunately, we are in a pretty good relationship with our neighbors who don't do anything in their building on Sundays, so we get to use their lot.
Oh,
There's
good.
also parking around the corner. But you know what? Being a moderately environmentally conscious people, there's places where you can park and then like ride share to here, and there's those little annoying fucking scooter things that are all over. During South by Southwest, people were like hanging them up in trees instead of leaving them on the sidewalk. But they're great for getting around. I don't know. If you don't have anything else, I guess we're going to move on to calls.
Let's move on to calls.
Let's do it. Do you have a preferred call? Screw it. Jake in California, you're on with Dennis and Matt. How are you?
Oh, hi, Dennis. Hi, Matt.
Hello.
I'm told here that you've seen God and that you think anyone can see God if you follow instructions. So do you know what the instructions are?
Okay, well, I'll start out. I was born in a Christian household, so I grew up Christian, but I had an experience in college that kind of made me throw all that out the window.
Were drugs involved?
Yes, I had an experience on a drug called dimethyltryptamine.
Yep.
Where I felt like
It's like I've done this for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Jake.
The experience was just so real to me that I can't just brush it off as something that's in my mind.
I can, and you should, and here's why. Because you just used the phrase "real to me." That's not a thing. People with various mental issues experience things that are real to them that aren't necessarily real. The time to decide that something is real is when you can get external confirmation from somebody else, when it's testable. Anything that just happens in your head, I appreciate the fact that it feels real, but what you're basically doing is saying, this feels so real that I couldn't possibly be wrong about whether or not this is a real thing. And you may be correct that what you experienced may be real. You may be correct that it touches on a God, but you have no way to demonstrate that to anybody else. And I don't think you have any way to demonstrate it to you because you're stuck with whatever experience you have. If, it reminds me of I'm not going to go down there because it reminds me of the people who think that celebrities are in love with them. They're convinced that it's real. And they're wrong.
Yep.
Now, it may be that a celebrity's in love with somebody. So there's somebody, if I was convinced that Taylor Swift was in love with me, everybody would say, you're delusional. But if she was, then clearly I'm not. And the way to demonstrate that would be to, provide evidence. So outside of your experience with DMT, what evidence do you have that convinces you that this was a real thing?
Well, other people have had similar experiences.
Sure, but
where they see entities and.
Isn't that true?
Yeah.
Isn't that true outside of DMT? If you go to pick a Baptist church and walk in, those people all think they've had an experience with the Holy Spirit. Does that mean they have?
Oh, no.
So if this drug has a similar effect in different people's brains, such that they experience, or some or many of them experience something that they feel compelled to describe as spiritual or supernatural or God, that still doesn't mean that that's what they actually experienced.
Yeah, but it has to do with the nature and intensity of the experience. So people in a church who believe they've heard the Holy Spirit, you have to compare that experience to what I've experienced, and it's just not the same. It's not as real.
Well, there's no way to compare them. Each will say their experience was intense and real.
Have you never seen Pentecostals slain in the Spirit to where they jump around, pass out, fall down, flop around? If you try to tell them that your experience on DMT is more real than theirs, you guys are going to have a protracted argument. This is all subjective personal experience. The fact that you might not have had an experience in church that compares with DMT doesn't mean that somebody else did. And it doesn't matter. Even if I took a pill and it set me in a place of orgasmic bliss where I was convinced that the almighty governing force of the universe was communicating directly to me, and it was more intense than anything that I'd experienced outside of there, that doesn't mean it's real. the intensity by which you experience it is indicative of what's going on in your brain, not what's going on outside your brain. But what are the instructions? What are the instructions that you think anybody can follow so that they can experience God?
Well, first of all, that this is an illegal drug, and also it can cause people to have PTSD, or people that are sensitive. I don't recommend doing it.
Yeah, I'm not recommending a drug. I wanted to know what your instructions were, because I think you're going to find that I have friends who've followed those same instructions. I've never done DMT myself. I have done acid, had fun times. I've never done DMT. I'm hoping to at some point, just so that everybody who calls in who's like, hey, you really need to do DMT so you can see God, I can be like, I've done it. But I have friends who've done DMT based specifically on the types of experiences you're talking about. My question, and I have friends who've not had the experience that convinced them that there's a God.
Well, the thing that emerges to me is you have an experience, and you're claiming that experience allows you to detect supernatural beings, the presence of supernatural beings, and not only that, but positively identify them. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how the hell you justify that.
Beings.
What's that, Jake?
I wouldn't call them supernatural beings.
Okay.
I think they're natural, but I don't think.
How do you know? How do you know?
In this dimension.
How do you? What the fuck is this about this dimension? What other dimension are they in, and how do you know?
Well, see, I'm kind of limited to the English language, which, to be honest, I don't think is designed to describe these experiences. The only way you can really experience what I'm talking about is to actually take the drug, but right now I just sound like a crazy person.
If I take the drug and I don't have the experience that you have, if I'm not convinced that there's a God, what went wrong?
I guess it's just your perspective, but
okay. Then how do we tell which of our perspectives is actually real? Or which of our perspectives is an accurate view of reality?
Good one.
Yeah, I don't know how to answer that.
I can pretty much guarantee you that Sam Harris has taken DMT. Still an atheist. As a matter of fact, I would actually recommend you send an email to Sam and listen to some of his podcasts where he's talked about his experiences with hallucinogens and things like that. And if you can figure out how, this is my problem. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm not saying you didn't experience God, this is just your brain. I'm saying I don't know how to tell the difference between the two, and I don't know how you can tell the difference between the two. And if you sit down with somebody else who's taken that drug and they didn't have the experience you have, now we have to figure out which of you, if either, is the one that's actually clued into reality. And what I find frustrating is that people seem more likely, in some cases, to trust their brain when we know for a fact their brain is not functioning correctly, when they're on a particular drug, which we know alters your perception, when they are near death, where your brain is starved of oxygen, and it invents a story about a near-death experience. There has to be some way to tell the difference between what you think happened and what actually happened. Otherwise, that's just like your opinion, man.
Right. It's just too hard for me to brush off this experience as something that's potentially in my mind that sounds preposterous to me after having experienced it. But I get what you're saying. I can't prove that they were extra dimensional entities. It's just my experience. So
yeah. So you had some experience.
Can't get much farther than that.
You had some experience with what you're describing as extra dimensional entities. And I realize that there's frustrations with the English language, which I share too. However, the fact that we may not be able to adequately describe what you experienced is still separate from whether or not what you experienced ties to the facts at all. You would admit, I would hope, that it's possible for you to take DMT or some other drug and have an experience which feels incredibly impactful to you, and yet still is a hallucination, is not an actual fact of reality, right?
That's a possibility, yeah.
Right. And
it just seems preposterous.
Why does it seem preposterous? If it's a possibility, don't you care about whether or not it's true? Don't you have a duty to figure out, how can I tell whether this is real or not? And by the way, did these extra-dimensional entities convey information to you, tell you what they want?
Well, that's what it felt like, but it's...
What do they want?
Once I left the experience, it's hard to remember.
So here's what sounds preposterous to me, that there are extra-dimensional entities who can only communicate to you when you're on a particular drug. And then when you're not on the drug anymore, you don't really remember what they said specifically. How fucking feeble are these things that you're calling gods?
Are you calling them gods?
It says here, I've seen God, anyone can see God.
Yeah, I call it God, but that's just the best word I have at my disposal.
I get it. But don't you think it's,
yeah.
I mean, what powers and abilities do they have? Are they just locked in another dimension waiting for the next person who's tripping balls to come in and get a message that they're not going to remember?
That's what it seems like.
Kind of useless. Seems kind of useless to me. Not only do I have no way of telling whether or not it's true, but if I can't recall the message that they got, what was the point in doing the thing in the first place?
Because it's pretty amazing.
Hey, look, I'm all in favor of having amazing experiences, and I am for the legalization of a great many drugs, perhaps not all, at least ones that aren't particularly dangerous. I'm all in favor of people exploring their humanity, but first of all, let's acknowledge some drugs are illegal for good reason, and it's because people don't always have... People are not themselves when they're on those drugs, and they do things that are damaging and harmful to themselves and others. So I'm not running around telling everybody, hey, just take whatever you want and enjoy it. I'm not advocating for hedonism, but if you have a good experience that you enjoy, why is it not enough to have an experience you enjoy without assuming that you've tapped into some secret of the universe?
Yeah, I guess I can say I don't know because I really don't know. But
there you go.
Yeah, just enjoy the experience.
It really felt like it. That's all I can say.
That's cool.
When I was in church, it really felt like the Holy Spirit was inhabiting my body because I felt things that other people felt. They described it as the Holy Spirit. It's this feeling of euphoria and elation, sometimes goosebumps when you're singing and praying and praising. And then I went out after I no longer believed and found out that those same experiences can be induced by a bunch of other things, and not just drugs and illegal drugs, but sex, secular music, art, on some occasions, an incredibly good meal or a conversation that stimulates parts of your brain that you've never experienced before. There is joy and wonder and passion throughout all of life, with or without chemical alteration. But the pathway to truth is to recognize, am I in a state where I can reasonably assess things? And do I have a mechanism to determine whether or not what I've experienced is likely to be real? And if the answer to those is no, then you just hit on the exact right answer. The right answer at that point is, I don't know. I've had lots of things where I can't explain it, yet I enjoyed it.
Okay.
All right.
Anyway.
Well, thank you.
Sure. I appreciate the call, Jake. And,
Thanks for talking to me.
Exercise some caution. Because one of the things that I have a concern with is people who are prone to leaping to the conclusion that something is supernatural or extra dimensional or whatever else, when they try to make sense of the thing they can't make sense of, that perhaps taking those drugs is not the best advice for that person. So make sure you're safe and that you're also spending time thinking in a stable state, reflecting on those experiences so that you can put them in a perspective when we know your brain is functioning as normally as possible. Now, you could make the argument, and I know you might be tempted to, that the way our brains normally work is the part that's broken.
Right, stunted.
And that it only works correctly when we're on DMT. Everybody wants to make that claim. And they could be correct, But how do you prove that? And that's where I'll leave you for today, Jake, but we appreciate the time.
Okay, don't do drugs. Don't do drugs, kids.
Thank you.
Just say no.
That's good. Wow. You have been doing this a while.
A little bit. We also from California. We have everybody's calling from California. David from California is on. You're on with Dennis and Matt.
Hello, yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought this might tie into the last call because what's listed here is that your point is evidences that are required for God cannot be provided, but aren't obstacles for belief.
Yeah, I had a hard time kind of trying to explain my point to the screener there.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, give it to us.
Well, I'm going to try to. First thing I want to say here is that I'm not going to argue for the existence of God. And what I mean by that is I'm not going to be able to manifest him here in front of you. That's not going to happen.
No.
Yeah, I figured that much from the first sentence.
Right. What I want to try to see if I can do, if it's agreeable, is to prevent a kind of form of extreme skepticism.
Okay, you're already off on the wrong foot.
Why is that?
Well, skepticism is skepticism, and what skepticism is a desire to have one's beliefs conform to reality as much as possible and to find and make use of the tools that produce the most consistent results toward that goal. What I hear often when people say extreme skepticism is they're suggesting something closer to cynicism where you just won't believe no matter how much evidence I present, when the truth is I'll believe anything provided there's sufficient evidence to warrant belief.
No.
Okay.
No, nothing like that. What I'm talking about is a kind of a skepticism that antedated anything that you find when the cynics took over the symposium or anything like that. I'm talking about a pre-Socratic form of skepticism.
Yeah, that's not me. There's a really great lecture from QED that A.C. Grayling gave on the history of skepticism and how the term changed and how the skeptics of old. That's not what modern skepticism. When I talk about skepticism,
I understand. I'm not taking a modern. Let's forget about that term. I understand what you're saying.
Okay.
Let's talk about the limitations of logic and of what the people that I'm bringing in citation here are people like Chomsky. I want to bring Wittgenstein into this, and I want to talk about propositional logics. I want to talk about the limitations of the syllogism, and I want to talk about the irreducibility of consciousness. And I want to do this. I want to set this up first with a premise that I'm going to deliver to you.
And you're going to do all this in how much time? Because the show's only an hour and a half long.
A couple of minutes. I'm going to need a little bit of runway, probably less than the amount of time that you spent talking about that with that fellow about his experiences on drugs, which I think is actually kind of a waste of time and an easy argument to overcome. But anyway, I want to start with is to say that evidence of the type that you are requiring will always be insufficient and will always be incomplete.
Stop.
Because they all are going to appear as products of thought, which I think you can agree with.
Stop.
And let me
David.
finish the...
No, David, no. There's a reason why I'm asking you to stop. Because if you say something that is inaccurate or that I'm not in agreement with, and I let you talk for 5 minutes, then we got to go all the way back to the beginning. You said evidence of the type I would require. I don't know what you mean by that because I don't know what the claim is. And if the claim is a God exists, I've said on many occasions, I have no idea what kind of evidence I would.
I'm not saying that. The type that you used before, let's use as our criteria the Aristotelian syllogism, which you have utilized on this show before. Can we use that as the criteria?
That's not evidence. That's a structure for a logical argument. You said evidence of the type I would require. I would like for you to explain to me what you mean by that.
Well, sir, what do you mean by you want to have evidence of God? What form would that take?
As I've said countless times, and just 30 seconds ago, I have no idea.
Yes, you do.
Okay, goodbye. You're not going to fucking call in and pretend like I'm lying and that I haven't said this over and over again. The fact of the matter is, if you go back to Arthur C. Clarke, you get any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. The point about skepticism is to have an epistemology that makes sure that your beliefs are actually warranted by evidence. If you tell me what your claim is, I can do my best to describe what kind of evidence I might consider convincing of that, both in quality and in quantity. But if you have not actually made a claim, I certainly can't tell you what sort of evidence is. And if we're talking about whether or not a God exists, even if after we've defined a God, I may not be able to tell you what kind of evidence that would be required, because that would put me in the position of being able to tell the difference between a God and something else that I don't understand. And that is not skepticism, that is arrogance. That is the special thinking that makes people think that there's a God who has designed everything for them and reveals things to them specifically. Of course, my God belief is warranted because I'm fucking special. Well, I'm not here to pretend like I'm special. I want to believe as many true things and as few false things as possible. That requires that I set up barriers so that I do not gullibly fall into certain beliefs, which I suspect you were going to go down the road of saying that's extreme skepticism. My answer to this consistently for years has been, I do not know what sort of evidence it would take to convince me that there's a God. But under most of the normative definitions of God, that God should absolutely know what should convince me and should be capable of producing it. And the fact that he hasn't means that either he does not exist or does not want me to know he exists. Either way, it's not my problem. And when you call up and say evidence of the sort that you would expect, and I say, I don't know what that is, and your immediate response is to say, yes, you do, well, fuck you. I got other callers. Goodbye.
Wow. Yeah.
A little salty today, but we got David also in California. How are you, David? You're on with Dennis and Matt.
Well, Hi, guys. I'm a little nervous about coming on after those two calls.
Well, just don't try to tell us what we think.
Yeah, I'll let Dennis steer for a while.
Either one, it doesn't matter. Look, the reason I'm calling...
It says here you were calling in to talk about the true intention of the Gospels, who wrote them, blah, blah, blah.
Yes. Because I got to tell you that my research has showed that most of the modern scholarship that has been done on the historical Jesus is wrong. And there's a whole different picture that actually exists of Jesus if you understand what the Gospels are all about.
I think you and I are going to find a lot of disagreement here fairly quickly.
Quite possible.
But I hope that's not the case, because I have friends who are mythicists, and mythicists, for me, fall into a couple different categories. There are the ones who are far more conspiracy-minded, where the scholarship's questionable, where they start talking about how Christianity was invented in the 4th century by the Pope and the Masons. And then there's others who are properly skeptical, who say, hey, we just don't have the sufficient evidence to conclude that this person actually existed or that we have a good record of what they did or didn't do.
Right.
And I'm fine with that.
Okay, but if I explain to you that the Gospels are not what you've been taught, that they are actually political propaganda, and that the parables reflect that political movement, and that there are other things outside of the New Testament and all the other, supposed proofs that Jesus existed.
It sounds like we're getting. It sounds like we're getting dangerously close to like Caesar's Messiah level conspiracy theorist crap.
Well, it's historical. I don't know if that's crap or not, but it's historical, and I can tell you pretty much who wrote at least Mark and Luke Gospels, and I have a pretty good idea that the same person wrote the Joseph and Asenath treatise. That would have been done by Philo of Alexandria.
Yeah, I've been down this road before, David. It's not relevant to the show. I have no interest in it, and we're going to argue back and forth where you're convinced that you've figured out the great mystery of who wrote it, and you're not going to convince me.
Okay, why is that?
Because I've studied this stuff, and the other people who are also experts in this have failed to convince me. And one of the things is because we're looking at a historical record. I tell you what, when was the Gospel of Mark written?
Very early.
Okay.
Very early. It would have been written. Parts of it would have been written just after 24 CE.
Okay, I would have
very early.
I would have dated it slightly later than that, actually.
No, these are very early. They're propaganda, and propaganda is only useful during the lifetime of its subject or the movement.
Here's the problem. Your date for Mark does not match up with even the other mythicists that I've talked with.
I know. I know.
And so
believe me, I'm not moved by that at all. I mean, I've listened to Richard Carrier and some of the other mythicists, and they don't understand. They take the Gospels at face value. And when you understand that Philo probably was involved in writing Mark and Luke, you understand that there's deep levels of allegory.
And when you understand that the lizard reptilians are secretly controlling the government.
No. Has anybody ever explained to you the fact that the Gospels are written the same way that Philo wrote his stuff? They're basically Jewish writings written in Greek with Latin titles. And Mark and Luke are Latin names. They're not Hebrew names. They're Latin names. Mark is from Marcus, for the god of war, and Luke is for Lucifer, the bringer of light.
Yeah, so here's the thing. You should get a hold of Carrier or Fitzgerald and see if they want to have a discussion about that. But this isn't what this show is.
Oh, okay. Well, I thought if it kind of basically went against or showed up the fact that mythicism isn't really based on a non-existent Jesus, that there was a historical Jesus and that people knew about him and wrote about him, that would be important. But apparently not.
So you are so far out from all scholarship that what you need to do is do the work and present it such that it becomes and is addressed by experts. You don't need to be calling in to an atheist show where neither one of us have any expertise in the subject of dating these or comparing the originals, which you don't have anyway. There's nothing that can be resolved here other than you're talking about something that to even some of the farthest out there mythicists is going to be disregarded and dismissed. And so there's nothing we can do on this show that's going to be good for any of us.
Okay. I've seen your show where you had somebody on, I can't remember his name, and he was very, very much in touch with the historical Jesus, and this caller called in. I have tried getting in touch with well-known scholars, people that are archaeologists and professors of, biblical studies, and they have the same attitude. It's like, oh, it's too far out. It's too much of a stretch.
Yeah, so do the homework and get it published and show them that you're right. That's the way this stuff's supposed to work.
Except that, and Richard Carrier is aware of this, they don't listen. They don't want to admit.
Well, tough. That doesn't mean you call into some random show that has no expertise and no dog in this fight.
As I said, I've listened to your show before, and there was an expert on there. Sorry that, you guys are not familiar with this point of view. Don't want to waste any more.
I am familiar with this point of view, which is why I'm not interested in talking about it. Thanks. It's for those who didn't understand a lot of what went on in that conversation. I know I touched on the fact that there's different categories of mythicists.
Yeah.
The whole thing is there are a group of people who are convinced that Jesus never existed as a historical figure. I'm on record of saying I'm not really bothered about whether he did or not. It's true that if Jesus never existed as an historical figure, Christianity fails, like right before you.
Well, out of the gate, yeah.
The problem is there's no way to demonstrate this. When you're talking about looking back at history, the best you can come up with is kind of inferences and suspicions, and it's like, well, this was written around this time and seems similar to this, which is exactly where it went. Oh, if you're familiar with the way Philo wrote, you'll see his hand marks on here. Well, there's also the possibility that somebody familiar with Philo was doing that there was a style that was being emulated. There's also this notion that Paul points out that there were books being run around forged in his name. It's even written there on one of the books that most scholars think was actually forged in his name, because that's what you would do. If I wanted to send a letter to the ACA from Denis Loubet, I would compose a letter as if I were Dennis and put, you can tell that this is really me because it's actually coming from my email address, and then I would find somebody who could spoof your email address and send it that way. That's exactly what somebody would do. Now, how do you tell the difference? The problem is we don't have access to originals. We don't have access to the eyewitnesses. We don't have access to historical documents of that time that would confirm it. Right. And here's the thing.
Nothing contemporary.
Oh, I just said, here's the thing, after somebody pointed out that was my thing to say, was here's the thing. if you look at all this, the fact that there's any question at all about whether or not Jesus was a historical figure, doesn't matter whether you go way out into the conspiracy theorist weeds or you're still within the realm of modern scholarship, the fact that God has not cleared this up is a damning enough problem for Christianity. The fact that this is an issue that isn't the most solid fact of all of history is already damning to Christianity. Because if you're God and you come down to earth at a time when there's no way to record this, where most people are illiterate, where proper scientific testing and skepticism and critical thinking are still far in the future of what we're doing. We're at the very beginning of, we haven't even reached like Enlightenment era stuff.
No.
Certainly nothing modern. And you decide this is the exact perfect point in time for me to come down and sacrifice myself to serve as a loophole for the rules that I'm in charge of. And this should be good enough evidence for everybody. You're a dipshit, because that is exactly the wrong time to do it.
Yeah, it's like you should ask God, have you met people?
Yeah.
I mean,
It's frustrating because, God is all knowing and all wonderful and all this stuff, and he's going to do this. Yet pick your religion. This God is not ever telling us anything that is incredibly novel to the people who are there.
Yeah, it's all through intermediaries, and it's all... there's the people who always talk about how, how this scientific discovery and that scientific discovery was predicted in the Bible or the Quran or all this other stuff. And you go, then why didn't those people discover that and use it, and they had a huge head start? Why didn't they figure it out?
The time that it became actual knowledge is when we tested it and confirmed
it became actual knowledge.
Not when somebody revealed a vague message that only in hindsight were you able to suspect was about that. Plus, this is all a bit like, hey, I've got a God, but he goes to a different school and you don't know him. That's the way this communication's going.
There was a character in, was it South Park, Captain Hindsight, who would show up at a burning building and fly in with his cape, and everybody would look up to him, and he'd go, "Well, you should have had this. You should have had fire extinguishers in the upper stories, and you should have done this, and you should have done that." And they go, "Thank you, Captain."
Should have turned that stove off before you left the house.
Thank you, Captain Hindsight.
That's funny. All right. We've got Kevin in California. It's California Day.
It is.
Kevin wants to know, why would I say that we don't choose our beliefs? Because he chooses his. So, how you doing, Kevin?
Yeah. Good. Yeah, I mean, to be quite honest, I hear you say that a lot. And honestly, it kind of shakes my faith and prompted me to call.
What do you believe that you think you chose to believe?
Well, that there's something after a place and someone overseeing it where we can reconnect with lost loved ones. I don't.
So you believe in some sort of afterlife, and you think you just chose this, and you don't think you were convinced in any way.
Well, I mean, if I have plenty of friends that are atheists, and we'll engage in conversations about this all the time. They love to, and it sort of always just boils down to there's no proof either way, and so I choose to believe. But I also have to try, and it sounds weird, apply logic to my illogical beliefs. Like, for example, I went to a Catholic high school. It wasn't really like browbeat with religion by any means, but it says in the Bible, he's a jealous God, and an all-powerful, all-knowing thing can't be jealous. It just can't happen.
Why not?
And so I can rule that out.
How could you possibly be all-powerful if you don't have the power to be jealous?
Well, it's not a power issue. It would be
That would be a
negative
flaw issue.
A quality that...
How do you know that jealousy isn't a good thing?
Jealousy?
How do you know it's not a good thing?
I do not. I can't say I do. I just know that it's one of the, 10 Commandments. And
No, actually, it's not.
think-
I mean, not coveting is a commandment, but don't be jealous isn't a
I
commandment.
mean, well, I guess I can't prove jealousy isn't a good thing.
Let's table that.
I don't think.
Let's table that and get back to this issue of belief, because I asked what you believed that you simply chose to believe. And you talk about the afterlife, and you said, well, you can't prove it either way, so I just choose to believe there's an afterlife.
When you ask how did I what convinced me, I guess I'd have to say I'm convincing myself with trying to apply what I know to what I suppose I want.
Okay, so there's another issue here, because I'm not convinced that I'm still not convinced you can choose a belief. I'm convinced you can choose to act as if you believe something, and I'm convinced you can choose to hope that something is true. But to actually be, you are actually convinced there's an afterlife, and you acknowledge there's no way to prove either way. So you merely choose to believe there's an afterlife. What else do you choose to believe about it? Who goes there and why?
I would think virtually everybody goes there.
Is there a good place and a bad place?
I doubt that. Nah. I would think, if anything, you just create your own bad place if you are taken to the next place.
So do you believe that do you believe that
thoughts? I don't know.
Do you believe that you're in control of what kind of afterlife you have?
No. Absolutely not. Not really.
Why not? Why wouldn't you choose to believe that too? Because if I'm just going to choose to believe that there's an afterlife, why wouldn't I choose to believe that it's, puppies and kittens and unicorns?
Good point, because I'm trying my best to choose to believe something right to the point of delusion and not go past that.
Well, too late.
I think it's unreasonable.
The line is behind you. The second you opted for an afterlife and said that you don't have any good reason to believe that it's there, but you're going to believe it because you choose to and you want to, now you've opened the door.
Sorry.
Now you've opened the door to believing anything you want about it. And now you're fooling yourself by saying, well, I don't want to believe that it's, a happy place, because that would be a bridge too far. Well, why didn't you stop before they're believing there was a place?
It very well will be a happy place for me, I would think, provided things don't go horribly wrong for me between now and death. But it won't be for everyone. But just, the puppies and kittens notion, that just, of course I love puppies and kittens, so there's going to be a lot of that there. But what convinced you? I feel like none of the things that convinced me are external, and I'm almost just talking myself.
You said nothing convinced you. You said nothing convinced you, and you just chose it.
Yeah, I'm convincing myself. That's right. Yeah.
Okay, so it sounds now like you're describing a process of intentional self-deception. Like, I really hope there's an afterlife, so I'm going to act as if I believe it until I believe it, and that's what Pascal was arguing for with regard to God belief. You asked what convinced me. I'm not convinced there's an afterlife, so nothing has convinced me there's an afterlife.
No, I meant prior to your conversion.
Oh, that was easy. A bunch of people I trusted told me there was an afterlife. And I thought that was a good enough reason at the time. And when I found out it wasn't a good reason, I could no longer believe it.
So, there was nothing that you experienced other than just being told?
I've never experienced anything related to an afterlife. Have you?
No.
Well, no, not about just an afterlife, about God. I understand, you were surrounded.
Yeah, it was my belief.
People.
My belief was based on a bunch of preaching, which is essentially, let's take really bad arguments and disguise them. That's what preaching is. And when I figured out where the arguments were flawed and where there wasn't evidence to support it, once I was a skeptic who cared about beliefs, I couldn't believe it anymore. I couldn't even choose to believe it. I'm either convinced of something or I'm not. Everything else is hope and wishful thinking, but it's not choosing a belief.
Well, that kind of, I think, is a way of describing it for me. I'm preaching to myself.
Yeah, why?
In the same way, I know it sounds weird, but you had people preach to you, you believe what they said. I'm analyzing what I see, and then the parts that dissolve into gray areas of illogical irrationalness, I kind of just have to go on faith at that point.
Why?
Hoping that...
Why would you
have to?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you don't have to go on faith at that point. You can simply abandon the thing. And if there's no evidence to support it, you can abandon it.
Okay, I know it's hard.
A lot of people I'd like to see.
I know it's hard, which is one of the reasons why we have these conversations. But if you say, oh, I just have to go on faith, well, first of all, no. You don't have to make a decision on something in the absence of sufficient evidence. But second, is there anything that you couldn't believe based on faith?
Oh, of course not. Yeah.
Okay, so if faith can lead you to both true beliefs and false beliefs, why would you ever willingly exercise faith? Why wouldn't you instead try to find a method that gets you more accurate results?
The specific reason would be that the way I use my faith dead ends to a place where it can't negatively impact my life, at least as far as I can see it. When I hope or choose to believe, and maybe a Freudian slip there with the word hope, but I choose to believe that based on things about physics, like energy can't be destroyed, it goes somewhere, there's possibly the energy that makes up your consciousness.
Okay, pause.
Organized when it leaves. I don't know. And
pause.
I would like to believe that that's what happens.
Okay, I know you'd like to believe. That's why I was talking about wanting to believe, wishful thinking, hoping.
Right.
Here's the thing: this afterlife that you believe in, is it a part of the Is it a part of physical reality?
Yes and no. If I had to describe it, I would say
yes and no is not a viable answer.
I know, but I'll explain real quick. A big tub of balls are multiverses. The space in between all those balls would be where we're going. I don't know.
Okay, so
it's not really in our universe.
But if you're going to go to physics, what on earth makes you think the physics that you're appealing to applies in that area?
Oh, I don't know.
Exactly.
It sounds similar, but it's not.
It's like you live in a house, and we've got the thermostat set at a particular temperature, and you're telling me there's a place outside the house where the thermostat's probably set to a different temperature, but you can tell me all about it because of the temperature in this room.
Oh, I mean, yeah, I get what you're saying there. I guess I don't have a specific enough definition to go forward on. It's
I don't know. Let me ask you this.
Does anybody believe in the afterlife then? I mean, I don't feel like these reasons are any less legitimate than anyone that calls in. And
okay, but if we're talking about something that's no, Daniel, Daniel, pause. If we're talking about something that is unfalsifiable, if we're talking about something where there's no way to show that it's false, saying, well, there's other people who believe for worse reasons is not in any way amplifying your reasons, because you don't have a reason other than you want to. Dennis, do you think that in any simple sense we ever choose what we believe?
Oh, gosh. Well, from my viewpoint of free will, which we don't want to open that world, I'm saying we believe what our experiences and our brain structure force us to believe. I mean, it's like we're forced to believe what we believe. We don't really have a choice. So
you're either convinced. You're either convinced or you're not, and you become convinced for good reasons or bad reasons. And in your case, you are acknowledging that you've essentially become convinced of something for reasons that you acknowledge are bad. You want this to be the case. There's no way for anybody to prove you wrong, so it doesn't seem like there's any harm in believing this, and so you go with it. Is that fairly accurate?
Yes, that's incredibly accurate.
Yeah. And wouldn't you acknowledge that if I said to you, I'm going to choose to believe that there's no afterlife, that when we're dead. And while I can't prove it, it's what I want to be the case, so I'm going to choose to believe that. Wouldn't you look at me like, why would you do that?
Well, I can see a lot would. Maybe I wouldn't, but yes, I know what you're saying there.
My position is, and the thing is, the argument against an afterlife is vastly stronger than anything that could be made for one. Because what we know about who we are as people and how our brains work and everything else, all the evidence points to the fact that dies when the brain dies, because it's malleable and alterable here in reality. There's the V.S. Ramachandran talked about a split brain patient where the corpus callosum was severed, and you end up with two distinct independent personalities who communicate independently, so that one half of the brain is able to speak, because that's the portion of the brain that controls speech, and the other half of the brain has to communicate, by writing or pointing to things or whatever else. And so you put a screen up in front of this person and you say, are you a woman? And, to point to no, and, you ask it other questions, and then it's like, do you believe in God? And the part that's speaking will say yes, and the other one's pointing to no. Now, we can reset memories, personality, preferences, everything about who we are is malleable in the physical world. There are people who will say, yes, but what's actually happening is there's a ghost in the machine, and you're tampering with the ghost's ability to control things.
Yes, your brain is a receiver to the signal from your soul in some...
But if that's the case, then these two personalities in the same brain, did just a soul get split in half? Are there two souls? Was there one soul and it just inhabited one half of the brain? And how do you tell the difference between a brain that is fully under the control of the soul versus a brain that is fully absent control by the soul? Until you can make that distinction, and the fact that we can recognize that this is possible, you could have mountains of people walking around, taking actions, making decisions, living life, and yet they're completely divorced from their soul. Which, if that's possible, then saying there's a soul in some other situation is something that's completely unwarranted. You can't ever demonstrate that.
Yes. Yeah, I cannot. It's just a constructed theory model that I have constructed in my head. But I'm starting to concede maybe that hope is not synonymous with belief.
Correct. We're in complete agreement. And if you say that you hope there's an afterlife, I can at least appreciate that. While I don't necessarily hope for an afterlife, if I found out that I got to live forever or even a longer time, or there was some kind of afterlife, I'd be like, cool. But until I have some time to believe that that's going to be the case, I'm going to focus on the one and only life that I know that I have, and that's the one I'm living now.
Right. Also, belief is like a binary. You either believe something or you don't.
There are people who argue against that.
I know.
I'm in complete agreement with you. And it's because when you and I talk about belief, we're talking about the state of being convinced. And so you are either convinced or not.
Yeah, if you almost believe something,
you don't believe it.
You don't believe it. Yes.
Fucking love Dennis. There we go. Hey,
I see.
So Daniel, it's not...
Hope sounds like almost believing something.
I have called you Daniel several times now, haven't I? And your name's Kevin.
It's okay. Everyone's from California named Dan today.
You get mixed up.
At the bottom of my call list, which we're going to go to in a minute, is Daniel from California as well. And so I wasn't looking at the on-air button. I just looked at the bottom. I apologize, Kevin. The thing here is...
Spelled my name right. It's good.
When you ask why we say we don't choose beliefs, that's why. Dennis and I view belief in this when we're talking about it. We're fine. If somebody wants to talk about belief in a different context, where they want to say it's a spectrum from disbelief to belief, sure, you're a 4.5.
Okay, sure. But I think you're talking knowledge there.
I do too. You're talking about confidence levels, which is almost by definition knowledge. But when you say you're either convinced or you're not, that's all we're saying, that you can be convinced for good reasons or bad reasons, including bad reasons of this process of intentional self-deception where you hope something is the case, so you begin to act like it's the case, and you gradually convince yourself, you become conditioned to it.
You can do that.
The only thing that I would say, which I think Dennis might agree with, is that you cannot, absent convincers and time, just say, I'm going to choose to believe this. I'm going to choose to believe that I can flap my wings and fly. I'm going to choose to believe that there are exactly 4 gods, and they are male, female, non-binary, and trans, whatever. But you can come up with anything like that. And if you say you actually believe it, that comes with baggage. Because when you believe something, it informs other decisions. No, I don't think there's any belief that exists in like a vacuum. Like there's a spot in my head here that believes that this pen will fall when I let go of it, and it only exists in that spot. Because the actual belief itself informs my actions, and the reasons I came to those beliefs inform the process by which I come to other decisions. So for you specifically, Kevin, when you're looking at this and you say, well, there's no way to prove it either way, and there doesn't seem to be any harm in me believing it, the potential harm in you believing this is if it's not true, then whatever process convinced you to believe it still exists in your brain, and that process can convince you to believe other things that are also not true.
And those may be dangerous.
So believing one believing one thing that's not apparently
can't argue
dangerous.
with that, although I feel like
Yeah. The other thing is,
led to something too unreasonable, but I don't know.
how do you know, if you believe there's an afterlife, how do you know that's not affecting your decisions? That could be affecting your decisions in a good way. It could be. I'm not saying that it's necessarily a bad thing. I'm only talking about the epistemological warrant for whether or not it's true. You can do good things for bad reasons. I could believe that, I'll go to heaven if I give 20% of my income to the church. Now, that belief may encourage me to give money, and that money may on occasion go to good causes. But that doesn't believe my belief was warranted. And it also doesn't mean that instead of giving 20% of my income to the church, that my 20% income might be better used by going to other charities that don't have the religious baggage as well. You can encourage people to do all kinds of good things for bad reasons. And we do it all the time. Parents do it with their kids every freaking day. You better behave or I'm going to beat the shit out of you. Okay, beating the shit out of them is a bad thing. Stop doing it. Stop threatening it. Oh, well, I can't argue with kids. Then you shouldn't have had them. Let's get some people who can actually reason. Oh, well, you can't reason with a 2-year-old, 3. You don't know what you're talking about, Matt. You don't have kids. I know, but I've been around lots of kids. And you know what? I never had a problem reasoning with a 2 or 3-year-old. It's one of those things where you find out who they are and what they can understand. And if they can't understand it, stop holding it against them. A very good friend of mine just said something yesterday. We were watching MasterChef. And there was one of the chefs on there, I think his name was Suba, was a little slower, and some of the other people didn't like him, and he got paired with somebody. And one of the things that frustrated people is he didn't appear to handle stress very well. And they're standing on the sidelines kind of yelling at him, hurry up, hurry up. And she was like, why are they doing that? Why are they being so mean to this guy? If you know that they don't handle stress well, why are you increasing the amount of stress?
Right.
And if you know that a kid's not going to be capable of understanding reason at the level you are, why are you trying that? Meet them where they are. And if they can't get there, stop fucking judging them and help them. It's a process. The 2-year-olds aren't supposed to think the way we think. They're learning. And if what you end up teaching them is that you need to be good or you're going to get a spanking, or you need to be good so that you get a reward, you're messing up, because what you should be teaching them is empathy and an understanding that the reason to be good is for its own sake and because you would like to live in a world where people are good to you without a carrot and a stick. Kids can understand this.
Yeah.
Kids know what it's like to be bullied, and that's what makes bullying people is what makes bullies.
True.
But anyway, I got off on a wild ass tangent there. But yes, Dennis and I still believe that you don't choose your beliefs in any simple sense. But also, as we are skeptics and critical thinkers, we would caution people that if you think you are holding a harmless belief,
you might want to examine that.
You might want to re-examine that.
I guess it's maybe it is just a really intense hope that I just kind of semantically.
And there's a lot of people who look for that hope.
How does anyone believe then?
Especially about afterlives.
Well,
The more you,
there are plenty of things where belief is warranted. Like, okay, obvious things like when I let go of this pen, everybody's de facto belief is warranted that it's going to fall to the table.
I'm talking about God, though.
Oh, yeah.
That's the thing.
I had to really alter my God beliefs with the most special pleading probably of all that I justify with logic anyways. That's irrelevant. But not, I mean, it's probably just hope. And I guess I just didn't want to admit that. And every time I'd hear you say you can't choose your beliefs and you kind of scold people, I'd get all.
That I apologize if it came off as scolding.
No.
That's a rather pedantic correction. That is about me. No. It's about me trying to get to clarity, to get people to a certain level of understanding, because our language is sloppy. And language, by the way, is our bitch. It's a tool that we use to communicate, and we get to play with it. We get to make new words. We get to massage things. We get to speak in code and have shorthand and all this stuff. It's the concepts that matter. And when the words get in the way, or you don't have the words for the concept, like our caller earlier who had a problem with that, then you set aside the words, invent a new word for the purpose of that conversation that points to a specific concept that you both understand. So if you and I wanted to talk about an afterlife, and we couldn't agree on what that meant because one of us is coming with Christian baggage and one of us is coming with other baggage, then we would invent a new word and actually sit there and define it. There is something after this life that we will experience, and that would be the sum total of it, and we'll call that Benalhma. Maybe something easier to pronounce.
Yeah, probably.
I don't know. I can't keep coming up with real words like pudding pop or whatever, and I haven't pudding pop in it. Anyway. I'm sorry to drone on about that. The key here is whether or not you and I agree that we choose our beliefs in any simple sense. You now have a better understanding of what Dennis and I mean by that, and you hopefully have a better understanding of what you mean by it, because you were recognizing that it was a lot more like hope, and that hope isn't necessarily synonymous with belief. And hopefully you take that on board and realize that, okay, evaluating whether or not this pen will fall is different from evaluating whether or not a God exists. But that's not the fault of reason. If there's a God and he's real and he's intentionally putting himself in a category where he's unfalsifiable and untestable, that is that God's problem. But what it also means is that nobody could possibly be warranted in believing that God exists because he's playing the world's most impressive game of hide and go seek. And if you don't believe, if you're not convinced that a God exists, when a God is intentionally hiding from epistemic warrant, that's not your problem. And any God that would judge you for failing to believe when they're intentionally hiding is a dick and unworthy of respect or worship or anything else. And so you've got nothing to fear from just saying, you know what? I don't know. It'd be nice maybe if I got to live forever, if I got to see my loved ones. I can't prove it either way. I kind of hope that maybe that's the case because I'd like to reconnect with some people. If it's not the case, I'm never going to know because I'll just be dead. But saying you convinced yourself to believe something.
Yeah. I hope the convincing yourself that there's an afterlife is not an attempt to protect yourself, because that would mean you've lost someone and you don't want to actually lose someone. You don't want to believe someone's gone.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically, I don't want to live forever so I can just watch TV forever. I mean,
yeah, but believing in an afterlife out of self-defense so you don't have to deal with reality because reality is painful. I hope it's not that.
No looking to check out early. No.
I know, but
nothing like that.
Are you dissatisfied?
Frivolous with my life.
Are you dissatisfied with life in general, and that's why you're optimistic about an afterlife?
No, in fact, very satisfied, and just the
Okay.
thought of having key people in my life.
No, it was a great point for Dennis to bring up.
That's the thing I was worried about. Let me put it flat out. If someone you love dies, to avoid the pain of their death, it might behoove someone to try to convince themselves that they're in a better place.
Yeah.
And I hope that's not what you're doing, because that would mean you lost someone.
Oh, well, I mean, I have lost people in the past, grandparents, things, pets.
Yeah.
And I do.
It's hard.
Hope that there's a better place, I guess. So, I mean, that's about as far as it goes. I think I really had the intent of trying to be just super honest. I feel like a lot of people call in and they're not totally honest, and I feel like facing the fact that it's hope and not belief.
No, we greatly appreciate it.
In the ass, and it hurts, but I mean, anyways, I kind of feel like we've gone as far as we can go with this.
Yes,
I agree, and you and your call were great. I appreciate the honesty and the thoughtfulness and the fact that you're willing to actually, answer questions. Take this comfort that you had with kind of saying, oh, well, maybe it's that, and maybe I don't know, and just apply it globally across your life, because it's going to turn out that that's going to be the right answer more often than not.
Yeah, you're right.
Live with uncertainty.
Anyway, I appreciate the time and the call, Kevin. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, I hadn't, having taken calls on the Afterlife so often, I didn't suspect that his reasons were in that category.
I didn't either, because he didn't bring it up.
Right.
But I thought I would mention it just as a thing. It's like, if you're looking for a reason to convince yourself of something, avoiding pain, might be a.
Well, I would argue that's probably one of the biggest reasons that we have some of these beliefs in the first place.
It's not a good reason, but it's definitely a reason.
But also, I'd like to point out that it's completely understandable.
Yeah.
Especially when you live in a world where our views of life and death and our views of grief have been so strongly tied to these religious notions that are designed to make it easier. I've been long have I been convinced that if we taught people from the beginning that death is the inevitable consequence of being alive, then we would do a better job of appreciating that life and appreciating those people in our lives while they're here. And then if it turns out there's an afterlife, I could view it as nothing more than like a bonus that I was, oh, surprise. Hey, look, I was wrong. And I'm actually kind of happy I was wrong, It's, but yeah, if it's a way to avoid the harshness of reality, first of all, you grieve the way you need to grieve.
Yeah.
But if it's incredibly difficult, by the way, it's worthwhile pointing out that there is the Secular Therapy Project. And for those of you who are dealing with difficulties after finding your way out of religion, there's recoveringfromreligion.org. I got a message from Daryl the other day, who was on the show. As it turns out, his visit to the show was phenomenal. And Recovering from Religion not only had I won't say it unprecedented. It may have been unprecedented. Far more calls in the short time frame after the show.
Good.
But also more people applying for volunteers and everything else. So if you're one of those people, thank you for watching. Thank you for caring, and then actually doing something about it, because you can care all day long and not actually do something. So we've got James in North Carolina. You're on with Dennis and Matt.
Hey, this is James in West Jefferson, North Carolina.
Oh, yeah. How you doing?
All right.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm up in the mountains. Got myself a log cabin and got on my bucket list. So,
wow.
That's not why I called.
Have you got decent internet access there?
Actually, I do, but I don't have your show up front. I was afraid I'd get feedback. So
no, that's fine. I'm just looking for a place to go hide from everybody, and a log cabin in North Carolina with internet access sounds pretty good. One without internet access.
Just give me a week's notice, and you can come and stay here. I got 2 guest rooms.
You'd have to turn the internet access off, because I think that's pretty much what I need at this point.
Yeah, right.
Off the grid.
Listen, what I was calling about was as I said when your guy answered the phone, the efficacy of intuition. And my son turned me on to your show, and I've been just binge watching you guys. And I consider myself an agnostic atheist, and that that's really neither here nor there for what I'm calling about. Intuition I really don't know that I even know what the definition or what it means, but I hear a lot of your callers who are theists who reach a point where they can't explain why they believe what they believe, and they're fumbling around, and logic just isn't working, and so they go to the whole faith thing, which I don't buy. I don't buy that faith is a legitimate reason for believing something, but I do have some experience with what I, for lack of a better word, call intuition, and that is I was a professor of fine art for 32 years, and I taught one of the classes I taught was design. And if you look into design, it's the concepts are all based on logical things that are very logical, like rhythm and balance and variety and harmony and things that can be explained logically. But I have, in my own artwork and with my students as well, I have reached points in the process of creating an image where the logic of design just didn't seem to solve the problem.
Oh, sure.
And so, and this, I used to teach this to my students, but I used it as well. The idea that, okay, if logic isn't working, then what am I going to do? And there, after years of experience, I would have this sense. Well, okay, I'm gonna forget logic, and I'm just going to make a decision based on some sense of the correctness of it. And I can't explain why it's correct. I can't explain why it's right, but it seems to work.
Yeah, I'm an artist who does the same thing.
Yeah, and so what I'm wanting to hear from you guys is what your take is on that, because I've spent years trying to figure it out, and I just know that I've reached a point and I've done a lot of artwork and whatnot. I've reached a point in many cases where I just don't know what to do, and so then I say, okay, well, just forget the design concepts. Throw the logic out the window and wait, and when I say wait, I don't mean wait 10 years, but, sure. give your sense a chance to come up with this sense of the correctness of whatever it is you want to do.
Yeah, well, you got to know when to break the rules.
Yeah, and I don't, I wonder whether, some of that kind of intuitive thing is not happening with some of your less happy theists who call and can't explain why they believe what they believe.
Huh.
It's one of okay. If I'm understanding this right, and I'm not an artist, Dennis is. I have. Are you familiar with Robert Wood, the landscape painter?
Yes.
Okay, so I have 25 or 26 Robert Wood lithographs and one original Robert Wood painting in my house. Cool. My mom started collecting it, and I fell in love with it. And he painted in the Catskills, and he painted here in Texas, and then he did kind of his seashore stuff in California. I can't tell you why I like it. Sometimes I think it's maybe a connection with nature or anything else. I can't draw or paint or do whatever to save my life. But I can appreciate the fact that when we're talking about something like art, there are the rules and things you learn. And then this reminds me of a talk, Bizarro at the Magic Convention was giving a talk, and he's like, this is going to sound a little bit like How to Be Creative, but it's not.
Right.
And I've talked with artists who are like, if I can't think of anything, I might just put the pen on the paper and move it around until it starts to look like something to give me the idea, to draw inspiration from something.
Correct.
That sort of intuitive thinking is great because we live our lives primarily by our guts, our inference and induction, because today is pretty much the same as yesterday. And but the value of that is entirely rooted in how well you've trained your gut. If you have not applied skepticism and critical thinking, if you've not honed your BS detector, then you're going to wind up believing a bunch of things that aren't true because you're making connections where they shouldn't exist. Similarly, I don't think when it comes to like a belief in a God, it may be the case that these people look at the world and are like, oh my gosh, there's just so much I don't know, and this doesn't make sense, and I don't know how to live my life, and what's going to happen after I'm gone, and what happened to my relatives, and all this other stuff. And then they're like, maybe I'll just put pen to paper. And hey, that looks kind of godlike. And then they find a bunch of other people who put pen to paper, and they start talking. They speak in whatever their language is, but the words they're saying are conveying intuitive concepts that aren't necessarily tied to reality, and yet they'll feel the connection.
Right, and they're intuitive to them, but it's like...
And this is how you get a bunch of people together to share a religious belief.
Yeah.
Right. And then as soon as you find out that, hang on, the thing that I was describing that you thought was the same thing you were describing, it's not the same. We found the thing about my thing that's different from your thing, and now we need to split, and you become the First Baptist Church, and I become the Second Baptist Church.
Right, the first schism.
I value, so one of the things, you go back to Spock with logic is the beginning of wisdom. When you talk about morality and ethics, I value empathy as an incredibly strong and significant part of anything related to morality. Not everything has to be something you could put in a syllogism. And the fact that you feel something doesn't mean that it's wrong. The fact that you've intuited something doesn't mean that it's wrong. Right. The caution that I would have everyone exercise is don't think that it's actually correct just because it feels correct and may even produce good results on occasion. There should always be a tentative thing where as soon as you get better information, you revise that.
Right.
Yes. Right. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
That makes sense. I don't know that. I don't know that I'll ever understand the process of how I come to those conclusions in my artwork, or how I've witnessed it with my students, and I just say, well, quit trying to use it. I used to tell them, okay, you're going to take my design course, and when you're done, forget it.
Right. Right.
And yeah.
But all the rules can be thrown out. You look at something like filmmaking, where right now Dennis and I are not positioned properly. I should be about here. So that, now you moved and that.
Oh, I did. I threw it off.
Because the TV centered, not only that, but then we've got our thirds and all that other stuff. But, and I don't know if Mark can do this or even wants to, but if you're watching a film, sometimes they'll tilt the camera at an odd angle because that does something to the viewer that puts them in a space. So you're breaking the rules of what would be a proper image, but you're doing it on purpose because you don't want a proper image. It reminds me of music where you're following, maybe you're doing a Lydian progression or whatever, and say, oh, there we go. Here we are. I don't know if you can. You can't see the screen, but the picture's.
And now we need creepy music, and that's perfect, right there.
Maybe you're following, a Lydian progression or whatever else, and you're expecting to go home, but somebody who's trying to convey a different message wants to hang on to that tension and not take you back home in the music where it is, and that is it. It is the imperfections that is where we find beauty. Yes, we lean towards symmetry, but perfect symmetry we find weird.
That'll look great to people scrolling through the YouTube video.
So I guess
Mark's so good.
Where I was going with this is that like I said, I watched a lot of your shows, and I sometimes feel sympathy for the theists that call and they can't seem to explain why they believe what they believe, and I'm thinking those poor guys. I understand because there are times when I've done things and I don't know why. I'm talking about in my artwork now. I don't know why I've done them, but I know that it comes out the way it should come out, or the way I feel like it should come out. And
it seems the whole structure of religion is rules based, and to break the rules is not a thing you do.
Okay.
And to be different from another religion means you're not breaking rules. You're obeying different rules.
Yeah, you're wrong.
And so it's like, it's all rules based at the crux.
The big thing is that all of our positions should be tentative. Our confidence level in them should be proportional to the evidence, and we shouldn't confuse the fact that intuition and other things like that, especially, in the arts, I have a difficult time with people who judge art as anything other than a subjective experience. I understand that there are rules of composition we've learned, but those rules, by the way, are still based on us as humans and what we want to see, and the fact that our brains are pretty similar. Yeah. And there's a reason why I can make predictions during a mentalism show. There's a reason why I was able to, blow people's minds last night just out there making predictions about what action they take, because we are far more predictable than we ever think we are. And so it's not surprising that we would come up with rules for art and then acknowledge that we can break those rules. The problem which you're pointing to is when people take those intuitive leaps and codify and sanctify those as if they are the new rule. That's probably where the problem comes in.
Right. Yeah.
On that note, James, I appreciate the call, but we have full lines in like 10 minutes. We're definitely going overtime.
All right.
If you are on the phone lines right now, we're going to do everything we can to get to all of you before we finish for the day. And there's lots of theists, so I don't know how long it's going to take. If you're not on the lines, we're not going to be taking any more calls today. If you are ever going to be in the atheist area, yeah, Austin is the atheist.
Welcome
to Mecca. Welcome to the Atheist Mecca. If you're going to be in the Austin area, by all means, stop by the library. If you're here on the weekend, please come to the shows and participate. There's also online forums and things where you can be involved in the organization. There's a community here for people, and we can't possibly say that enough. We are thrilled with the people who showed up today from all over the place. Raise your hand if you're not from Austin. Yeah, that's like half or more. It's a great place. You should visit or move here if you're nice. But we're going to try and knock out some calls. By the way, after the show's over, we will be having dinner. I haven't been told what we're having or who's taking. I don't know. Hey, pizza. Woo! Pizza. So all you college students. Oh wait, UT's not in session right now. Whoops, you missed out on pizza. What were you thinking, Secular Student Alliance? There's going to be pizza.
Can't wait. All right.
Let's head on. I had said this before. Daniel in California, you are on with Dennis and Matt.
Hi, how you guys doing?
Just
Great.
fine.
So I called because I want to talk about flood mechanics and how modern science is starting to prove that the flood happened.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, modern science is not starting to prove that the flood, not a global flood.
Very much so, a global flood.
Then explain the cultures that survived it?
Yeah, they didn't seem to notice the flood?
Yeah.
Well, we know our genealogy has been found to come from a few thousand families from that area where the Ark had landed.
We don't know where the Ark had landed.
Right.
You have no evidence that there was an Ark.
Where the Ark believed to have landed.
Oh,
Okay, I don't give a shit where the Ark was believed to land. Somebody finds that every couple of years. Prove there was an Ark.
I'm here to prove there was a flood.
Okay.
Okay.
Then we have pine trees 9,000 years old.
When was this flood?
9,000 years ago.
We have clonal tree colonies older than that.
There's trees older
It
than
does
9,000
not work.
years old.
Huh?
There's trees older than 9,000 years old?
Yes.
That I'm not sure about, but I tell you where you can find your answers. If you go to Talk Origins, there's an index to creationist claims, and I was just going to pull it up to look, because here's the thing. Not a scientist, not a flood expert, don't have any expertise in the area, so I would have to rely on those people. You think that about 9,000 years ago there was a flood and that science is confirming this. What new findings of science do we have that support the notion that there was a global flood about 9,000 years ago?
Just to start, I want to say that I'm a non-denominational Christian. Most of my views don't follow the norms of most beliefs.
How is that remotely relevant to the scientific findings related to a flood?
I just wanted to edit before. The findings would be like, I'm sorry if I'm butchering her name. Is it Marie Schreider, the one who found the malleable proteins in the T-Rex fossil?
I have no idea.
I forget her name, but they found malleable proteins in the fossil, which they know can only live roughly 5,000 years, give or take a couple.
Wait, you think dinosaurs existed 5,000 years ago?
Their estimation was roughly 5,000 years, but it could give or take a couple thousand years. I believe dinosaurs died in the flood. I believe the flood included the extinction of the dinosaurs. It included asteroids, the creation of plate tectonics, and possibly a a collision between the Milky Way galaxy and one of its satellite systems.
Okay, in the interest of honesty, I have to say, no, the oldest tree alive is 4,500 years old.
I thought 9,000 was a bit much. But I stopped
wrong.
there. Unfortunately, Daniel's no longer with us on the show and potentially in reality.
Oh.
Here's the thing. Much like the other caller who wanted to try to call to prove that Jesus was a fiction invented, blah, 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 blah. As soon as you start saying modern science is proving a global flood, and then you try to date dinosaurs to 5,000 to 9,000 years ago.
No, not going to work.
Yeah, if you think humans and dinosaurs ever walked the earth together, the Flintstones is not a fucking documentary.
Right.
And no credible scientist on the planet, supported by any evidence, would hold that that's the case. But it was everything. It was, this happened, 9,000 years ago, and men and dinosaurs cohabitated. And then the Milky Way galaxy collided with one of its, and I'm like, holy crap. I hit my limit for...
Right.
First of all, I don't have the relative expertise to debunk all that. But you can go to talkorigins.org, where at least the passingly sensible claims that we can address have been addressed in the index to creationist claims. But that said, it's interesting that someone would call up and say, I think this. I'm more concerned with why. And if you think, so science isn't a person.
Right.
Science isn't a thing. It's not a cabal. Science originally just meant knowledge, and so the things we describe as scientific findings are tentative, they are based on the best evidence, and they have to be falsifiable. I'm not appealing in any fallacious sense to authorities, because it's only fallacious if you say it's true because they said it's true, or if you appeal to an insufficient authority. When we're talking about scientific experts and the data, it's not fallacious to say these are the findings of science.
Right.
Because we're not saying it's true. But if you think you're going to turn all of science on its head and date dinosaurs to 9,000 years ago, do not call this show. Submit your paper and earn your Nobel Prize. Submit your paper for peer research. Go after the actual experts. If you call in to say, this is what science is saying, and it's not in scientific papers or magazines, is definitely...
Right.
I know everything I need to know that you're calling the Atheist Experience to offer your take on the fundamental facts of reality and how it flies in the face of what everybody else who actually knows and understands and studies this stuff believes. Because you're calling to talk to me, and you're calling to talk to Dennis, and neither one of us are geologists. We're not biologists.
Right.
We're not historians. We're not astrophysicists.
And all that shit has to be wrong for you to be right.
Yeah. It's funny because, if you want to argue against evolution, okay. Evolution can't make predictions. Actually, it can and it does.
It does.
Which is how we found Tiktaalik. Because we said, if it is the case that species morph over time, and if our understanding of both the genetic and the fossil record are such that this creature existed at roughly this time frame in this layer of rock,
right,
and now there's a modern antecedent, then at some point in between there, or a descendant, not antecedent, at some point in between there, we should find a creature that is somewhere along that transition. And they found a spot where the rocks were of that age, and where we had a good enough understanding of what the environment would have been like in that area of the Earth in that time frame. And they dug, and they found Tiktaalik. Exactly what we predicted we should be able to find. Now, it's interesting because there's no guarantee we were going to find that, because a creature becoming fossilized is rare. It also could be that somebody had made a mistake about how much time there was, or what this creature would have looked like, or where we were. Maybe we have another. Countless mistakes would have had to been made in order for us to go there and expect to see something and not.
Right.
But not seeing it doesn't mean we're wrong. But if you see it, that's a pretty good indication that all the things that led you to that. It would be like saying, you know what, if my model of the solar system is correct, then we should be able to land on Mars, go to this location on Mars, dig a hole, and not only find remnants of water, but possibly an underwater civilization of living beings. And no matter how preposterous that sounds, if we go there and dig and find that, then the things that led you to that are more likely to be correct than not.
Yeah.
You might as well be calling in to say the devil goes around planting bones to confuse us.
And I would like to add, an 80,000-year-old colony of quaking aspen is the oldest known clonal tree located in Utah. 80,000 years. Somehow it survived the Great Flood.
Well, you know, that tree can survive a flood. Trees like water.
I guess so.
And you know, people will do this. Oh, well, how did the fresh water and the salt water things both survive when it's all muddled up? Well, as it turns out, God magicked it to happen. Or
magic. Okay. Well, that solves everything.
Or the water, when you have that much water, it dilutes the saline content, so that some of them can just like barely survive for a couple months that needed more salt, and the ones that needed less salt can barely survive.
So yeah.
You can ad hoc and post hoc any explanation you want,
right?
But don't call in to think you're going to present the science that overturns the flood. Go get the Nobel Prize. Go to the Templeton Foundation. I'm sure they'd, you know, if it's any good, a pro-Christian organization that's trying to constantly find ways to debunk the atheists and the seculars, and show evidential support for their supernatural claims. Surely they would be interested in someone.
Oh yeah, definitely.
The flood happened 9,000 years ago.
Apologetics.
Chelsea in Tennessee, how are you doing? You're on with Dennis and Matt. Chelsea hung up as soon as I said hi. Or got disconnected. Chelsea, if you're there, call back and talk to the screener, and we'll try to take your call as well. Eloise in Iowa, you're on with Dennis and Matt.
Hi, how are you?
Hello.
Sorry.
Doing all right. What's up?
I probably, I'd say within the last year, have been very comfortable identifying as an atheist.
All right.
And initially it was a little more turbulent, I would say, feeling like I'm losing something in terms of an afterlife.
That's a familiar story, yes.
Yeah. And there's more to lose, too, because this sort of thing ends up breaking up relationships. There are people who've lost their entire family and social structure, and that's serious. That's like grieving, 30 deaths at once is how some people have described it.
Well, so that's kind of what I'd like to talk about and ask you if that's all right.
Sure.
Yes.
So my parents actually just came to town earlier today, and I had a conversation with them trying to explain how my reasons for leaving, for questioning in the first place, and then ultimately leaving religion behind.
Right.
And a large part of that was being a part of the LGBT community and growing up Baptist.
Yeah.
And just feeling unaccepted and, I guess, persecuted, to be honest.
Yeah, and actually, I feel bad about this now, but it was an important life lesson. There was a point where I was going to come out to my family as atheist, and at one point I was jokingly going to sit them down and say, "Mom, Dad, I'm gay." And then when they freaked out, I was going to be like, "No, I'm not gay. I'm just an atheist." And at that point in time in my head, I don't know that I would have ever actually done that, but it seemed like a potentially clever way to soften it. And then I realized that, no, that's just me being shitty because there's nothing wrong with either one of them.
Right.
And I'm playing into their perception that something is potentially more wrong about one than the other. And that was a complete garbage idea that I would never do now. Although, at the time it felt like something that was humorous because I'm not in that affected class. And when I met a number of my friends who have been on the show who are both part of the LGBT community and atheists, almost all of them said it was harder to come out as atheist than it was to come out as LGBT. And
there's more apologetics against coming out as atheist.
Yeah, and in your case, having to deal with both, I'm curious about what your experience has been with that and what you're specifically worried about today.
So I came out as bisexual first.
Uh-huh.
And that wasn't, I'm in my mid-20s, and it was in my early 20s when I came out. Basically after having left home and really experienced the world, I grew up pretty sheltered.
Mm-hmm.
And I was basically told, well, you don't need to act on it. And yeah.
Oh.
And that I can't even describe the amount of pain that's caused me.
Yeah. Anytime somebody's going to tell you, if their response is, well, you don't have to be who you are, I don't think they have the first clue, because in many cases they're looking at that as the love the sin, hate the sinner thing. So God has given you this burden to deal with regard to your gender identity or your sexuality or whatever else. But that's a test that God has given to you, and you don't have to act on it. And actually, you will be a more dutiful, righteous servant of Christ if you don't. So God gave you this obstacle to make you stronger. Well, what a dick. First of all, if God ever did that, God's a dick. But whether or not a God did it, anybody who's making...
Sorry.
What's that?
I said that was the conclusion I came to.
Yeah. But what's worse is we don't even have to consider whether or not there's a God or whether or not a God did this, because I don't have any reason to believe there's a God. And everybody who tells me what God thinks is just them telling me what God thinks. But the people who make excuses for that, the people who have bought into this hook, line, and sinker, they might actually be as bad or worse, even if there was a God. Because they're sacrificing their humanity and what they know and understand about reality in order to serve an idea that they can't even demonstrate is real or good.
Right. So they have come around a little bit with me being bisexual, but not really. It's more of just, well, there's churches that do accept that kind of thing. And so today when I was telling them, I'm happier as an atheist because I'm not made to feel shame about who I am anymore.
Right.
Right.
I can enjoy life.
I bet I could predict their response, but I want to hear it from you.
Well, so my dad said, and then that's when my dad brought up the LGBT church. He's like, well, I understand why you feel pushed away from religion. I was the victim of abuse when I was younger, and they understand that, and so he said he understands, but he thinks that I should still try to find a church that fits me. And I don't know how to explain to him, and my mom for that matter, that it's not even that, like, it's not even the issue of I think God's a dick if he exists, and even if he doesn't, he's still a dick, just as a fictional character can be a dick.
Yeah. I will say,
But
so I'm terribly sad about the abuse, and not merely because it happens, because that is bad enough, but it will complicate what's going on now, because the normative thing for many people who have been raised in an antiquated paradigm is that, oh, that abuse now defines you and who you are, and it's why you have these thoughts. It's why you are the person you are, and it's why you're rejecting a God. It all ties back to that, and that's going to make things worse. I am happy that your dad was I appreciate the fact that your dad was at least willing to point you towards churches that would be more accepting and inclusive. It speaks a lot about your dad, that because there are other people who, the second they had this conversation, they'd be ostracized from the family, and you're just a sinful garbage reprobate, and of course you don't want to worship God because that'll convict you of your sinful nature and all that. So it's nice that your dad seems to be doing much better than other people would. The problem is, I suspect, and this is just a bit of a guess, that he just doesn't understand and doesn't have the tools to know how to deal with this, so he's trying to give the best advice he can, and it seems like probably he wants you in a community so that you're not alone and with people who are supportive, and he just doesn't know any other options other than, well, there's a church down the street that does this. Because if he was too serious of a believer, like my parents, if I came out as gay or trans or whatever, they'd never say, oh, well, there's a church down the street that is okay with that. They are so strict fundamentalists that those churches are of the devil. You know, they are not good church. So the fact that your dad's at least that far is encouraging, and I hope that you can continue to kind of make him see, no, this isn't just rebellion, and it's not, while I do need community, it's not necessarily a religious community I need. Right. What I need are people, irrespective of their views on gods, who care about me and value me for me.
Right. And it's funny, you actually were completely correct when you said my sexuality being attributed to the abuse. My mother likes to use that a lot. She's less understanding than my dad, and would not give that same suggestion.
Are your mom and dad still together?
They are still together.
Wow, there's some interesting discussions going on there. I'm all in favor. I mean, they're your parents, and I cut my parents a lot of slack over the years because I realized that this was something that was done to them in the same way that it was done to me. It's not that they are intentionally malicious or hateful. They've been trained to see the world through a very particular lens. And when you don't see through that same lens, it's terrifying. Not just of, the fundamentalist view of, oh, well, you're a sinner and you're going to go to hell and I'm not going to see you in an afterlife. It's terrifying because it raises concerns in their head that maybe they're wrong. Because one of the things that people in my family had a difficult time dealing with is their old perception of who atheists were. We were sinful, evil people. They,
right.
Like as the Psalm says, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt and can do no good thing. And that was the mindset. That puts them in a position where they have a son who they know, who they love, who they know is a decent person who wants to help people. They know is somebody who does not lie, or rarely lies. I mean, everybody lies, but I'm generally honest, and I try to do things. I'm working for charitable efforts. I'm honest about what I believe, and they know and have watched me do good things as an atheist, things that they have to acknowledge are good. And this puts them in a position of saying, hang on, if our son who's an atheist is able to do these good things, then that means the psalmist is wrong, which may mean that God is wrong, which may mean that I'm wrong. And that's a terrifying position to be in. So I try to be as compassionate as I can to realize that this is something that was done to them as well. But also I was willing to cut them entirely out of my life if necessary, if they would not stop being a toxic influence. Because whether you're blood related to somebody is completely irrelevant. If someone is making your life worse, they don't need to be a part of your life. But if they're making your life worse and claiming that it's love, you have got to find the time to put your foot down to say, I love you. I love you enough that I've put up with this type of stuff for a while. I would like for us to have the kind of relationship where we could talk about the things we like and enjoy and share. And I know that when you go off privately, you're still going to judge me. But stop doing it in front of me, because you are doing real harm. It is not love. The thing that you're talking about where, oh, we do this from love, that's the same crap that happens in spousal. He hits me because he loves me, the spousal abuse stuff. It's all about correction. It's all about they can't be wrong and they can't face the possibility that that might be the case. And so they're going to take it out on you. You don't have to put up with that. And there are communities and people that you can reach out to make sure that you are in a place where that's not going to happen. I understand. I don't ever want to cut my parents out of my life. There are family members who I love and despise what they think. And I don't want to remove them from my life as long as we can continue to have a relationship where things are productive and good. But the second they're a toxic influence, I don't care if it's a parent, if it's someone I'm in a romantic relationship with, if it's someone who's a friend or co-host or whatever else, I don't have to take that, neither do you. And so the first thing is for you to look out for your mental health, your physical health, to find the communities, whether it's an LGBT-friendly church, whether it's a secular community, wherever it is that you find what you need, where you are not being badgered and judged, and people who have no experience making medical diagnoses are talking about how this is a result of trauma or you're in rebellion. All that stuff has to find its way out of your life before you're going to be able to just breathe.
Right. So, yeah, and I don't feel like I need a church. And I guess I'm wondering if you have any advice on how to tell them that.
This is going to be terrible, but tell them. I find straightforward honesty, even if it's just potentially going to be initially shocking, to probably be the best course of action. If it comes up again, just tell them, I don't believe in these things, and I don't feel the need to be in a church. I do feel a need perhaps to have community, but if that community is one where we agree on one thing and disagree on other things, I just want a community where I can be me without judgment, without harassment. Even if there was a church that would give me that, I don't share their views on God and religion. And anybody who loves you, yes, there may be something we're going to have a terrible initial reaction, but anybody who loves you should be able to take on board, this is the way you feel, this is what you want, this is who you are, and they should care more about whether or not you're happy than whether or not you're godly.
That's a good point. Thank you.
Absolutely. And by all means, call us back and touch base. Let us know how it goes. Also, I would reach out to local communities in your area, both secular organizations, LGBTQIA plus whatever, however many we're adding on to those, because I don't know where anybody fits and I don't want to necessarily leave anybody out, but there's tons of communities like that. And as you make this transition, just remember you can always reach out to Recovering from Religion, the Secular Therapy Project, and actually talk to experts who are going to give you better advice than I will.
I'm not an expert. I've led an incredibly privileged life. I've never had to come out about anything. And so it's like I feel incredibly underqualified to try and respond to people like this.
And I've done it
wrong. I can
wrong.
offer my sympathy, but I can't. I don't know what it feels like from the inside.
Yeah. But
did you grow up an atheist?
Huh? Me? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I was a little kid, I thought religion was like Santa Claus for grown-ups, that nobody really believed it. It was just sort of entertainment. And later in the Boy Scouts, I discovered that I was the only person standing, upright when everybody else had their heads bowed. And I went, oh, crap, people actually believe this.
Yeah.
And that was that, yeah. No, my folks never pushed any religion on me or anything. Science fiction and stuff got me through high school and that. So, yeah, no, I didn't have to come out as anything to anyone. And so I've just been incredibly lucky.
But by all means, depending on what you decide to do, how you decide to handle it, I'd love to hear how it went. You're free to call us back, or you or anybody else can email tv@atheist-community.org to let us know. Hopefully you find a way to be happy and safe.
Yes, thank you so much for taking my call. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Good luck.
Yeah. You talk about, this is both of us have lived incredibly privileged lives in a number of different categories. You never had to come out. On the other hand, and you don't carry the baggage of that religious stuff.
That's the thing, yeah.
I mean, I'm 50 now and still discovering baggage I didn't even think I was dealing with.
Yeah, I feel totally unqualified, and I mention that, and people say, oh, don't worry, you were lucky.
Yeah.
I go, okay.
All right, we got 2 calls left. I'm going to start with Matthew in South Carolina. You're on with Dennis and Matt.
Hey, how y'all doing tonight?
Hello.
I'm doing pretty well. I was told you had a question for me.
Yes, sir. I'll get to that in just a second. In reference to what you said in a previous call, you said don't call in unless science and talk about science unless it's what is, it's being printed and what the journals are printing or whatever is printed in science, right? You said don't call in and try to justify science.
Yeah, I'll backtrack. I'll backtrack on that a little bit. I'm talking specifically about somebody who comes in who's presenting a position that is antithetical to established scientific understanding that's supported by data and evidence and experts, because calling into a call-in show where there are no experts to talk about it is not how you get your fringe view to be accepted. I don't have a problem with talking about the subjects. I'm sorry I gave that impression.
Oh, no, it's not that. It's just, you ever talking about like evolution and the dinosaurs and everything in that call, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the original title of Darwin's book, The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection and the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life.
Yes.
So if you support evolution and what was printed on it, are you racist?
No.
No.
That's what the science says, though.
No, actually, that's not what No. That's not what the science says. So you came up with the original title. Did Darwin have some racist views? Sure. Does that have anything to do with the natural process of one species evolving over time? No. The fact that people viewed things... The fact that people viewed things through the bigoted and misinformed lens of their time is certainly sad testament to the fact that we still had growth to do. But that's completely independent of whether or not the science shows common ancestry, shared descent, and a process by which allele frequency changes over time.
Right.
These are
facts.
Also, one of the ways this was often framed was this preservation of preferred races or whatever else. The common phrase was survival of
Survival of the fittest.
Of the fittest.
Yeah, which is wrong.
And that people took that and presumed that there was a way to assess qualities about people with regard to their fitness. And they would go in, this is the same people who believed in phrenology, reading bumps on the head and other things like that. Fittest, from the standpoint of scientific natural selection, is dictated entirely by the environment and whether or not a particular individual within a group lives long enough to pass on its genes. And so you could be a terrible, shitty, manipulative person and pass on plenty of your genes. And so you qualified as the fittest. Like you could be like a serial rapist running around impregnating just countless people. And we would view that as a completely immoral thing. It is a fit way to ensure that your genetic code goes on. That is independent of whether or not it's a moral or ethical thing. And the same is true when you talk about Darwin's racist views and the racist views of that time. When you talk about favored races, they made conclusions about different humans that weren't based on evidence. They were based on observations of difference. And that's why when we teach evolution by means of natural selection, we have gotten rid of that racist claptrap that people try to hang on it, and we've talked about instead, this is genetics. This is allele frequency change over time.
And I'd like to add, even though we agree that evolution happens, it doesn't mean we approve of its methods.
Yeah.
I mean, evolution is not our friend. There's mountains of extinct species testifying to the fact that evolution is not our friend, and we could disappear tomorrow, and evolution would carry on and wouldn't care.
The scientific facts are separate from the conclusions that people hang on it, and people could justify all sorts of bigoted, hateful, racist crap by appealing to certain scientific findings, and that just tells us about who they are. That doesn't tell you what the science is.
Right, and when aspects of evolution are not to be emulated. There's no reason we should artificially emulate them.
Anyway, continue.
So what you're saying is this science is just specific to the times. So who's to say that the science and everything that's going on now won't be the same way 100 years from now?
So I'm not saying that
the views that
No, Darwin's theory was correct.
We're still Darwin's model of evolution by means of natural selection is still the de facto standard.
Yeah. The subsequent research that has happened has added to it. It's corrected parts of it, but it's still the basic premise is there.
And if in 100 years we have a completely different understanding of biological diversity on the planet and it is better supported by evidence, then that will be the current best findings of science.
Yeah, it's like Einstein's general theory of relativity replaced Newton's gravitation, but it didn't replace it. It just, here's a more accurate model.
Yeah, the
Newton
Earth isn't
got us
flat.
to the moon. I mean, you know. So
the Earth isn't flat, but if you're building a house, you're building it with respect to it being locally flat, which is why you can pull out a level and make sure your boards are level and everything else. But that doesn't tell you where the Earth is flat. Anyway, go ahead.
No, I was just sitting there. It's like I've heard in previous episodes where the issue of slavery always comes up. Or like, how can you believe in a God that condones slavery? So I was just sitting there like, how can you believe in a man's theory who based it on racial segregation?
But he didn't. But he didn't. See, that's the thing.
It's in the title.
Okay.
Why is it edited out if it's not? Why do they purposely edit it out?
I'm going to tell you.
Got to go looking for.
I'm going to tell you. He didn't base it on that. That was a conclusion from other observations. Darwin's observations applied to finches and other things else, and other examples, and he didn't understand genetics or anything else because we didn't have that. So he created this model that was based on common ancestry. From that, he and others made conclusions about other things as derivative from that. So he didn't base it on a racist view. He based his racist views on differences in observation and what he saw in species. It's a directional thing. Now, what you asked was, hey, I object to the Bible advocating for slavery. That's because Darwin isn't God, and Origin of Species is not a Bible or an instruction book. It's not telling you what to do.
Right.
It is describing what is. And from that, we continued to explore and find more information. No one is worshiping Darwin, or somebody somewhere is probably fucking worshiping Darwin, and they're wrong to do so. But it's different when you have a book that is supposed to be from the Almighty, giving instructions for how you can enslave people from the heathen who surround you. That is an instruction to do something. That's in a completely different category from here's my observations about reality, because we can go through Origin of Species and take a look at what Darwin got right and what Darwin got wrong. Now, the underlying model, this profound view of all life being related and that changes happen, and that given enough time, this is a satisfactory and probable explanation for the diversity of life, that still stands, and it's been amplified and supported by evidence, and it has survived
all tests.
Every attempt to falsify it.
Yeah.
That's not true for something like Exodus 21. That's not a scientific finding. It's not supported by evidence or data. It is a proclamation that you shall buy your slaves from the heathen that surround you, that you can beat them as long as they don't die within a couple days. This is an instruction on what is morally permissible, not what is a scientific fact. So comparing the two, when you say, I don't see how you can believe a theory from a man who had this view, well, the theory is correct, independent of whether that person was shitty. There could be a mass murdering, just absolute garbage human being who comes up and tells me, hey, 2 + 2 = 4. They're right.
I'll have to agree.
Independent of how terrible they are. That's not true for the Bible, because when you're looking at this is supposed to be instructions inspired by the all-wise, all-knowing governor of the universe and all of reality. And it's supposed to be a moral prescription. And so that's why I find it objectionable.
We can talk the semantics of language and everything regarding that, but I'll get back to the original question that I posted on here. Man, I've seen your history and everything, and I've heard you talk about how for like 25 years you studied to be a preacher.
Yep.
And I've seen the conversations and things you had. And I mean, I really like to have like a heart-to-heart with this right here. This is not to be antagonistic or anything in that regard, but as a man who sits there and knows scriptures, just sitting there just talking with you right now.
Okay.
Just like looking based on your backstory, your history, and the way things are now, I see like evidence of like how a Pharisee would be, not an atheist.
So I don't know what to tell you other than maybe you should stop thinking you understand me and viewing with your lens. Also, I'm not sure that that a colloquial use of Pharisee is wrong or incorrect, or if it's even in conflict. But I'm someone who does not believe that a God exists, which is why I use the atheist label.
Yeah.
Are you suggesting that you think I do believe that a God exists?
I suggest that you sit there and say, come down from the cross so that we may see.
What does that even mean?
Okay.
Matt knows what it means.
That would be skepticism. And if somebody's in a position where they don't believe that another person is divine and they ask them to demonstrate it, then they are an atheist who's advocating for skepticism and critical thinking.
Well, let's take a look at the Pharisees. They had the scriptures. They were supposed to know the scriptures, and they were supposed to apply the scriptures to their community in a sense of leadership. But when God himself sat there and showed up and revealed himself to them, they used the Bible, they used the scriptures, they used everything to sit there to bring accusation against God. In fact, they tried to sit there and philosophically trap him and to sit there to get him to negate himself, which is characteristics of almost all your philosophical discussions. But then the Pharisees also enjoyed their place in the public and in the high seats and on the high councils. And then you sit there and you see your history of all these debates, the celebrity, sitting with all these people on high councils. It's like you sit there and traded the truth in for a consolation prize, man.
I can understand your reason for reaching that conclusion. The problem is you think I traded the truth in, and I don't think it was true. So you would need to demonstrate that it was true in order to convince me I traded the truth in.
I'll say this, man.
Do you have some way to demonstrate that what I used to believe is true?
Well, I'll just ask you this, man.
I just asked you a question.
Yeah, and I'm going to answer it. I just need to know something from you first.
Okay.
Do you deny that Jesus Christ is the Son of God? Do you deny him before men?
I will say that I do not accept that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. I can't prove that he ever existed. I can't prove what he was or wasn't. If in fact there was a Jesus who was the Son of God, I have no reason to believe that's true. Am I asserting that he wasn't? No, because I have no way of demonstrating that. If you come up with a claim that's unfalsifiable, it would be stupid for someone to pretend that they can falsify it. So I may never be in a position where I can say, Jesus was not the Son of God. I'm always in the position where I can say, I don't believe that Jesus was the Son of God. I don't believe there's a God. I don't believe gods have sons. I don't believe any of these stories that have been, as far as I can tell, made up by people until there's sufficient evidence to do so. So if you're wanting me to commit the unforgivable sin, which actually that wouldn't be it, that would be apostasy, which is attributing the works of the Holy Spirit to Satan. I can never do that because I don't believe in Satan either, so I'm never going to attribute anything to Satan. If you want to know, do I actually not believe in a God? Yes. Do I actually not believe that Jesus was divine? Yes. Do I believe that Jesus rose from the dead? Nope. Do I believe that he reigns forever in heaven? No. Do I give a rat's ass what any holy book or proposed supernatural being has to say about life and reality? Nope. I care about facts and evidence and things that are demonstrable, because everything else is just navel gazing. Now, do you have a way to demonstrate? Now, answer my question. I answered yours. Do you have a way to demonstrate that what I used to believe was true?
You know what I said is true.
Goodbye, jackass.
Don't tell us what we fucking think, dickhead.
I swear to the God that you think I still believe in and claim that I know exists, I will hang up. Oh, there's my kitty. So I want to explain this. It's not actually my kitty. I had a rough couple of days, and I was concerned that maybe I would be a little too hangy-uppy today, whereas I've been doing pretty good the last couple of weeks. And so I told Mark, if I get to the point where it looks like I'm going to go off the rails at all, just put up a cute kitten. I will see it on the screen, and everything will be fine. And everything is fine.
Everything is fine.
And I tell you what, there's one caller left, but we have gone way beyond the time that even Mark said I could go. So I'm going to take that call after the show's over. We're going to stop here. Zachary, stay on the phone. I will talk to you once the show's over because I want to get to you. But I don't want to hold people up because I think there's pizza here that I can probably smell. And we've harried everybody around long enough. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Thanks,
Indeed.
Thanks for the kitty love. And for all the people, if you're coming to Austin, by all means, stop by the building. I know I said it many different times. If you're in an area where you don't have a community like the ACA, where there's not a place where you can go where you feel safe and appreciated, where you don't have to be harassed about your God belief or constantly being expected to give reasons for why you are who you are, then build one. Yes, it took many, many years and the dedication of a great many people, but you can do this in your area as well. Ours started with an ad in a newspaper. That's how old it is.
Yeah.
I would not recommend that path. I'm not even sure how much I'd recommend Meetup and some of the other things that are 15, 20 years old. But there are plenty of online resources and there are individual communities. Reach out to one of the national organizations. They can put you in touch with the state director if they have one and any local groups they have. But do what you can to make sure that the people who are finding their way out of religion have a landing space. The people who've always been out of religion are able to participate in those things without you don't know what it was like to be me, because you don't. That's true for everybody. I don't know what it's like to be Dennis. Dennis doesn't know what it's like to be me. People who presumed to know what it was like to be me, many of them have recently found out that they were massively wrong. Oh, Matt doesn't have to deal with the religious crap in his family the way I do. Yes, I do. Yeah. Oh, Matt's this way or that way. Or the people who call in to tell us what we believe and what we know, and you know that I'm right. The instant you're going to call in and talk about how I gave up the truth. And when asked if you have any way to demonstrate it, and all you do is assert that I know the truth, you're right. I know the truth. The truth is that you don't have a good reason for your belief. You are ill-equipped to have the conversation, and you are terrified that somebody could be reasonably warranted in not believing what you believe. And that's why you make accusations against other people as if you could read their fucking minds. You can't. And if you think you can try and prove it, and the JREF can get you $1 million for that.
Hey, yeah.
Thanks so much to the people on that side of the wall who are the awesome folks who let us run way over time. The people directly in front of us who came from all over the place to enjoy the show. We'll be back next week. Until then, I don't know, have a week.
Thanks so much.
Woo.